Sarah Martinez had always been a woman of quiet strength, but nothing could have prepared her for the journey that would change her life forever. At 28 years old, she worked as a nurse at a civilian hospital in Texas, maintaining a life that many would consider ordinary. However, her world revolved around someone extraordinary to her, her husband, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, who had been deployed to a forward operating base in Afghanistan for the past 8 months. The separation had been brutal on their marriage. Video calls helped, but the time difference and unpredictable military schedules made communication sporadic at best. Sarah found herself staring at her phone for hours, hoping for a message that would confirm Miguel was safe for another day. The constant worry was eating away at her, affecting her work performance and her ability to sleep peacefully through the night. Miguel had been different during their last few conversations. Something in his voice suggested he was struggling more than he wanted to admit. The pressure of leading a small reconnaissance unit in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan was taking its toll. During their last video call, Sarah noticed dark circles under his eyes and a tremor in his hands that hadn't been there before. When she asked about it, he brushed off her concerns with his typical soldier's bravado, but Sarah knew her husband well enough to see through the facade. The idea came to her suddenly, during a particularly difficult night shift at the hospital. She had just finished helping a veteran who had been admitted for post-traumatic stress disorder, and his stories about the importance of family support during deployment resonated deeply with her. The military had programs that allowed family members to visit deployed soldiers under special circumstances, particularly around holidays or during approved leave periods. Sarah began researching the possibility of arranging a visit to Miguel's base. The process was more complicated than she had anticipated. Military regulations required extensive background checks, security clearances, and approval from multiple levels of command. Sarah spent weeks filling out paperwork, attending interviews with military personnel, and providing detailed information about her background, employment, and relationship with Miguel. The bureaucratic maze seemed endless, but her determination never wavered. During this time, Sarah also began preparing herself physically and mentally for what would be a challenging journey. She researched the climate and conditions in Afghanistan, understanding that even a brief visit to a military base would expose her to an environment vastly different from her comfortable life in Texas. She began working out regularly, building her stamina and strength, though she had no idea how crucial this preparation would become. Miguel was initially resistant to the idea when Sarah finally told him about her plans. During a crackling satellite phone call, he expressed concerns about her safety and the additional stress her presence might place on his unit. However, Sarah could hear the longing in his voice despite his protests. She knew that seeing her would provide him with the emotional support he desperately needed, even if he was too proud to admit it. The approval process took nearly 3 months, during which Sarah continued her regular life while anxiously waiting for news. She maintained her work schedule at the hospital, but her colleagues noticed her distraction and the way she constantly checked her phone for updates. Her supervisor, understanding the situation, was supportive and helped arrange for extended leave once the visit was approved. Finally, in late October, Sarah received the call she had been waiting for. Her visit had been approved for a 2-week period during the holiday season. The timing wasn't perfect. It would mean spending Thanksgiving away from their families, but it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Miguel's commanding officer had personally endorsed the visit, recognizing the positive impact it could have on the morale of one of his most reliable soldiers. The journey to Afghanistan began with a commercial flight from San Antonio to Washington, D.C., followed by a military transport to Germany, and, finally, a heavily secured flight into Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. Each leg of the journey felt surreal to Sarah, as she found herself surrounded by soldiers heading to and from deployment. The weight of their experiences and the gravity of where she was going began to sink in during the long hours of travel. Landing in Afghanistan was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The thin air at altitude, the unfamiliar sounds and smells, and the constant presence of armed soldiers created an atmosphere of tension that was both frightening and exhilarating. She was processed through security checkpoints, briefed on safety protocols, and issued basic protective equipment including a helmet and body armor that felt impossibly heavy on her small frame. The final leg of her journey involved a helicopter ride to Miguel's forward operating base, located in a remote valley surrounded by imposing mountains. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the place her husband had called home for the past months. The base looked like a small fortress, surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire and dominated by guard towers that constantly scanned the surrounding terrain. Miguel was waiting for her as she stepped off the helicopter, and the moment she saw him, all the stress and uncertainty of the journey melted away. He looked thinner than she remembered, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of months of vigilance and responsibility. But his smile was the same one that had captivated her when they first met, and when he wrapped her in his arms, she felt truly safe for the first time in months. The base commander, Colonel James Harrison, personally welcomed Sarah and briefed her on the security situation and the protocols she would need to follow during her stay. The base housed approximately 200 soldiers from various units, including Miguel's reconnaissance team, infantry squads, and support personnel. Despite being located in hostile territory, the base had maintained a relatively peaceful routine in recent weeks, with only minor incidents of enemy contact. Sarah was assigned quarters in a secure area of the base, close to the command center but far enough from the perimeter to provide additional protection. Her accommodation was basic but comfortable, a small room with a cot, basic furniture, and access to shared bathroom facilities. The simplicity of her surroundings stood in stark contrast to her life back home, but she embraced the experience as part of understanding Miguel's world. During her first few days on the base, Sarah was struck by the sense of brotherhood among the soldiers. Despite coming from different backgrounds and units, they had formed a tight-knit community bound together by shared purpose and mutual dependence. Miguel introduced her to his team members, and she was touched by how they had looked out for each other during the difficult months of deployment. Sarah also began to understand the daily routine of military life in a combat zone. Days began before dawn with security briefings and equipment checks. Patrols went out regularly to maintain a presence in the surrounding area and gather intelligence on enemy activities. The base operated on a constant state of readiness, with soldiers rotating through guard duties and maintaining equipment around the clock. What surprised Sarah most was how normal life could seem within the confines of the base. Soldiers played cards, watched movies on portable devices, worked out in a makeshift gym, and maintained correspondence with loved ones back home. The military had created a small slice of civilization in the middle of nowhere, complete with a dining facility that served surprisingly decent food, and a recreation area where soldiers could decompress during their limited free time. Miguel's role as a team leader meant he carried significant responsibility for the safety and effectiveness of his unit. Sarah watched him interact with his soldiers and was impressed by how naturally leadership came to him. The young men under his command clearly respected and trusted him, seeking his advice on both professional and personal matters. However, she could also see the weight of this responsibility in the way he constantly checked on his team members and the vigilance he maintained even during supposedly relaxed moments. The base's location in the valley provided both advantages and challenges from a security perspective. The surrounding mountains offered natural protection but also provided potential hiding places for enemy forces. The single road leading to the base was heavily monitored and regularly patrolled, but it remained a vulnerable point that required constant attention. Sarah learned that supply convoys faced regular threats, and the base relied heavily on helicopter resupply for critical items. During quiet moments, Miguel shared with Sarah some of the challenges his team faced during their deployment. They had been involved in several firefights with insurgent forces, and 2 members of his unit had been wounded in an improvised explosive device attack several months earlier. Both soldiers had recovered and returned to duty, but the incident had reinforced for everyone the constant danger they faced. Sarah found herself forming friendships with other soldiers on the base, particularly the medics who appreciated her nursing background. She volunteered to help in the base medical facility during her stay, providing an extra pair of trained hands for routine medical care and health maintenance. This work gave her a sense of purpose and helped her feel like she was contributing something valuable rather than simply being a visitor. The communication infrastructure at the base was limited but functional. Soldiers could make scheduled calls home using satellite phones or internet connections when available. Sarah was able to call her family and supervisor to let them know she had arrived safely, though she was careful not to provide any specific details about the base's location or security measures. As her first week progressed, Sarah began to feel more comfortable with the rhythm of military life. She learned to recognize the different sounds that punctuated the day: the whir of helicopter rotors, the rumble of vehicle engines, the sharp crack of training exercises, and the constant hum of generators that kept the base operational. What had initially seemed chaotic and intimidating began to make sense as part of an organized system designed to keep everyone safe and mission-ready. Miguel seemed to relax more as the days passed, and Sarah could see the positive effect her presence was having on him. He smiled more frequently, laughed at jokes from his teammates, and appeared less tense during their conversations. Other soldiers commented on the change in his demeanor, confirming Sarah's belief that her visit was providing the emotional support he needed. However, both Sarah and Miguel were aware that her time at the base was limited. They tried to make the most of every moment together while respecting the demands of military duty. Miguel still had responsibilities that required him to be away from her for hours at a time, but they established a routine of sharing meals together and spending quiet time in the evenings when his duties permitted. The base's security protocols required Sarah to remain within designated areas at all times, but she was allowed to observe some training exercises and routine operations. Watching Miguel work with his team gave her new appreciation for his skills and professionalism. He had always been disciplined and focused, but seeing him in his military environment revealed aspects of his character that she found both impressive and attractive. As her second week began, Sarah felt like she had gained valuable insight into Miguel's world and the challenges he faced every day. The visit was accomplishing everything she had hoped for, strengthening their relationship, providing him with emotional support, and giving her a better understanding of military life. Neither of them could have anticipated that events were about to unfold that would test both of them in ways they never could have imagined, and that Sarah's presence at the base would prove to be far more significant than a simple morale visit. Sarah's second week at the base began with an unexpected revelation that would prove crucial in the days to come. During a casual conversation with Sergeant First Class David Chun, one of Miguel's team members, the topic of recreational activities arose. The base had limited entertainment options, and soldiers often shared hobbies and skills to pass time during off-duty hours. "You know, ma'am, we've got a makeshift shooting range set up behind the motor pool," Chin mentioned while they were sharing coffee in the dining facility. "Some of the guys compete to see who's the best shot. Miguel's pretty good, but nothing compared to Specialist Rodriguez. That kid could probably hit a dime at 300 yards. Sarah smiled and mentioned something that surprised everyone within earshot. "I might give them some competition. I've been shooting since I was 12 years old." The comment drew curious looks from several soldiers nearby. Miguel, who was reviewing duty rosters at the next table, looked up with raised eyebrows. "Sarah, you never told me you were into shooting sports." "You never asked," she replied with a slight grin. "My father was a competitive shooter, and he taught me everything he knew. I was on my high school rifle team and competed in civilian marksmanship competitions through college. Haven't had much time for it since starting my nursing career, but I still try to get to the range a few times a month." This revelation sparked immediate interest among the soldiers. The idea of a civilian woman, especially a nurse, being skilled with firearms seemed to challenge their preconceptions. Several team members good-naturedly challenged Sarah to prove her claims, and Miguel, curious about this aspect of his wife he had never fully appreciated, encouraged her to accept. The next afternoon, during a scheduled recreation period, word had spread throughout the base about the impromptu shooting competition. Colonel Harrison, upon hearing about the event, decided to observe personally. He was always interested in activities that boosted morale and brought the unit together, and the unusual nature of this competition had captured everyone's attention. The base's shooting range was a simple affair: sandbag barriers, target stands at various distances, and basic safety equipment. The weapons available were standard military rifles, which differed somewhat from the civilian sporting rifles Sarah was accustomed to, but the fundamental principles remained the same. After receiving a brief orientation on the specific characteristics of the military weapons, Sarah felt confident she could adapt quickly. The informal competition drew nearly 50 spectators, including off-duty soldiers from various units and support staff who had heard about the event. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly, with the usual military banter and good-natured betting on the outcome. Most soldiers assumed they were about to witness a respectful but decisive victory by one of their trained marksmen. Rodriguez, the young specialist Chin had mentioned, was indeed an exceptional shot. His first series of targets at 200 yards showed a tight grouping that impressed even the experienced soldiers watching. Chun, Miguel, and several other participants also demonstrated solid marksmanship skills, hitting targets consistently at medium ranges with standard military accuracy. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the firing line with calm confidence that surprised many observers. She took time to familiarize herself with the weapon's balance and sight picture, making subtle adjustments to her stance and grip. Her breathing was controlled and deliberate, and her movements were economical and precise. Her first shot at 200 yards struck the target dead center. The second shot grouped tightly with the first. By the fifth shot, she had created a pattern that was noticeably tighter than any of the previous shooters had achieved. The casual conversations among the spectators gradually quieted as they realized they were witnessing something exceptional. "Beginner's luck," someone called out, but the comment lacked conviction. As the competition moved to longer ranges, Sarah's performance became even more impressive. At 300 yards, her groupings remained remarkably consistent. At 400 yards, a distance that challenged even experienced military marksmen, she continued to demonstrate accuracy that drew murmurs of genuine admiration from the crowd. Rodriguez, who had been confident about his chances, found himself genuinely challenged for the first time in months. His competitive spirit drove him to shoot better than he ever had before, but Sarah's performance remained consistently superior. Miguel watched with a mixture of pride and amazement as his wife demonstrated skills he had never known she possessed. Colonel Harrison approached Miguel during one of Sarah's firing sequences. "Sergeant Martinez, your wife has some remarkable talents. Has she ever considered military service?" "Sir, this is the first time I've seen her shoot," Miguel replied honestly. "I knew she enjoyed target shooting as a hobby, but I had no idea she was this skilled." The competition culminated at 500 yards, a distance that pushed the limits of the available weapons and the range itself. At this distance, factors like wind speed, humidity, and even minor variations in ammunition could significantly affect accuracy. Most military personnel were considered excellent marksmen if they could hit targets consistently at this range, let alone achieve tight groupings. Sarah took her time preparing for this final phase of the competition. She studied the wind flags positioned along the range, made mental calculations about bullet drop and drift, and adjusted her aiming point accordingly. The first shot took several seconds longer than her previous attempts, as she waited for optimal wind conditions. The shot struck within an inch of the center target. The second shot grouped closely with the first. By her final shot, she had created a pattern that would have been impressive for any military sniper, let alone a civilian nurse visiting her husband. The competition ended with enthusiastic applause from the assembled soldiers. Rodriguez graciously acknowledged her superior performance, and several soldiers approached Sarah to ask about her training background and techniques. The event had transformed from a casual recreation activity into a demonstration that would be discussed on the base for weeks to come. Colonel Harrison officially congratulated Sarah on her performance and privately asked if she would be willing to share some of her techniques with the base's designated marksman. He recognized that her civilian competitive experience might offer insights that could benefit his soldiers' training programs. Over the following days, Sarah found herself spending time with the base's most skilled shooters, sharing knowledge about breathing techniques, trigger control, and mental preparation methods she had learned in competitive shooting. The soldiers were eager students, and Sarah discovered she enjoyed teaching these skills almost as much as she enjoyed demonstrating them. Miguel was amazed by this new dimension of his wife's abilities and somewhat embarrassed that he had never taken her shooting hobby seriously. During their private conversations, Sarah explained that competitive shooting had been an important part of her life for years, providing stress relief and personal satisfaction. She had simply never found the right opportunity to share this interest with him, especially given his demanding military schedule. However, as the days passed, the atmosphere on the base began to change in ways that had nothing to do with shooting competitions. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity in the surrounding region. Patrol units reported more frequent sightings of suspicious individuals, and intercepted communications suggested that insurgent forces might be planning something significant. Colonel Harrison increased security protocols, implementing additional guard shifts and restricting movement outside the base perimeter. The daily briefings began to carry a sense of urgency that had been absent during Sarah's first week. Soldiers who had seemed relaxed and casual became more focused and alert. Miguel's reconnaissance unit received orders to conduct more frequent and extensive patrols of the surrounding area. These missions required him to be away from the base for extended periods, leaving Sarah with more time alone and more opportunity to observe the changing mood among the remaining personnel. The base's intelligence officer, Captain Lisa Wong, briefed all personnel on the evolving threat situation. Enemy forces appeared to be moving equipment and personnel into the region, possibly in preparation for a coordinated attack. While the base's defenses remained strong, everyone was reminded of the importance of maintaining vigilance and following security procedures without exception. Sarah noticed that soldiers began checking their weapons more frequently and that guard posts were reinforced with additional personnel. The casual atmosphere of her first week was replaced by a more businesslike focus on security and readiness. Even routine activities like meals and recreation time carried an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been present before. During one of Miguel's longer patrols, Sarah spent time in the base medical facility helping with routine health maintenance and minor injuries. The base medic, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, appreciated the additional help and shared some of her concerns about the changing situation. "We've been fortunate during this deployment," Santos explained while they organized medical supplies. "Minor injuries, some illness, but nothing serious. The intelligence reports have everyone worried that our luck might be running out." Sarah understood the implications. In a remote location like this base, serious casualties could quickly overwhelm limited medical resources. The nearest major medical facility was hours away by helicopter, and emergency evacuation might not always be possible depending on weather conditions and enemy activity. The base's defensive preparations became more evident as the week progressed. Additional ammunition was distributed to guard positions, and backup communication systems were tested and verified. The Quick Reaction Force, a specially trained unit responsible for responding to immediate threats, conducted additional training exercises that seemed more realistic and urgent than routine drills. Sarah found herself thinking more frequently about the wisdom of her visit. When she had planned the trip, the base had been experiencing a relatively quiet period with minimal enemy contact. The changing security situation made her wonder if her presence was creating additional concerns for Miguel and the base command, who now had a civilian to protect in addition to their normal responsibilities. Miguel attempted to reassure her during their brief conversations between his patrol duties, but she could see the concern in his eyes. He was torn between wanting to spend time with her and his responsibility to his unit and the mission. The romantic reunion they had both envisioned was being overshadowed by the realities of military life in a combat zone. Colonel Harrison called Sarah into his office one afternoon to discuss the security situation and her options going forward. He explained that while there was no immediate threat to the base, the intelligence reports were concerning enough that he wanted to ensure she understood the potential risks of remaining for the full duration of her planned visit. "Mrs. Martinez, I want to be completely transparent with you," the colonel said. "We have contingency plans for protecting all personnel on this base, including you. However, I also want to make sure you have all the information you need to make informed decisions about your safety." Sarah appreciated his honesty and directness. She had come to visit her husband, but she had no desire to create additional burdens for the soldiers who were already facing significant challenges. At the same time, she was reluctant to cut short a visit that was clearly providing important emotional support to Miguel. The intelligence situation continued to evolve throughout the week, with reports suggesting that enemy forces were not just moving through the region, but potentially positioning themselves for sustained operations. The base's patrols began encountering more sophisticated improvised explosive devices and evidence of more organized enemy presence than had been seen in previous months. Sarah's shooting skills, which had initially been a source of entertainment and friendly competition, began to take on a different significance in light of the changing security environment. While no one explicitly discussed the possibility of civilians being called upon to defend the base, several soldiers mentioned to her that it was reassuring to know that everyone on the base, including visitors, had some capability to contribute to collective security if necessary. As her second week drew to a close, Sarah faced a difficult decision. Her scheduled departure was still several days away, but the security situation suggested that leaving sooner might be the prudent choice. However, Miguel's unit was engaged in increasingly important mission activities, and she knew that her presence continued to provide him with valuable emotional support during a stressful period. The base had become a different place than the one she had arrived at 2 weeks earlier. The relaxed, almost routine atmosphere had been replaced by focused preparation for potential combat operations. Sarah realized that she was witnessing the transformation of a military unit from peacetime operations to wartime readiness, and the experience was both fascinating and sobering. The attack began at 3:47 in the morning on a moonless night, when most of the base was asleep. Sarah was awakened not by the sound of gunfire, which would come later, but by the sudden silence that fell over the base when the generators were simultaneously destroyed by coordinated mortar strikes. The constant electrical hum that had become the soundtrack of her stay disappeared instantly, leaving an eerie quiet that lasted only seconds before chaos erupted. The first explosions came from multiple directions at once, indicating a level of coordination that immediately told the base's defenders they were facing a well-planned assault rather than a random harassing attack. Sarah rolled out of her bunk and onto the floor as she had been instructed during the security briefings, her heart pounding as the reality of her situation became clear. Emergency lighting systems activated throughout the base, casting a strange glow over everything and creating deep shadows that seemed to move with each additional explosion. The base's alarm system began its piercing wail, officially announcing what everyone already knew: they were under attack. Miguel burst through the door of Sarah's quarters within minutes of the first explosions, carrying his combat gear and a spare protective vest. His face was grim but controlled as he helped her into the body armor, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the chaos erupting around them. "Stay calm and do exactly what I tell you," he said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "We're going to move to the command bunker where you'll be safe. Keep your head down and follow me closely." The journey across the base compound to the fortified command center was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Mortar rounds continued to impact around them, sending up showers of dirt and debris. The night was filled with the sounds of shouted orders, running footsteps, and the distinctive crack of incoming fire. Emergency lighting created a surreal landscape of harsh shadows and blinding bright spots that made it difficult to navigate familiar areas. The command bunker was a reinforced concrete structure built into the ground, designed to withstand direct hits from all but the largest enemy weapons. Inside, Colonel Harrison was coordinating the base's defense while his staff worked frantically to assess the situation and communicate with higher headquarters. "Sergeant Martinez, get your wife to the secure area and then report to your unit," Harrison ordered without looking up from the tactical display that showed red indicators representing enemy contacts at multiple points around the base perimeter. Miguel escorted Sarah to a designated safe area within the bunker, a small room lined with sandbags and equipped with emergency communication equipment. Several other non-combat personnel were already there, including the base chaplain and 2 civilian contractors who had been visiting the base on technical matters. "I have to go help defend the base," Miguel told her, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Stay here, no matter what happens. If anyone other than American soldiers tries to enter this room, there's a weapon in that green case. You remember everything from the range." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was asking. Her competitive shooting experience had been recreational, but Miguel was suggesting she might need to use those skills in a very different context. "I'll be okay. Go take care of your soldiers." Miguel kissed her quickly and disappeared into the controlled chaos of the command center. Sarah found herself alone with the other civilians, listening to radio communications that painted an increasingly serious picture of the attack unfolding around them. The base's perimeter defenses had been breached at 3 separate points. Enemy forces were using a combination of direct assault and infiltration tactics, suggesting they had detailed knowledge of the base's layout and defensive procedures. The attackers appeared to be a mix of local insurgents and foreign fighters, equipped with military-grade weapons and explosives. Captain Wang's voice crackled over the radio as she provided updates from the intelligence center. Command, we're tracking at least 60 enemy personnel, possibly more. They're using coordinated small unit tactics and have heavy weapons support. This is not a random attack. Sarah listened to the radio traffic while trying to remain calm and useful. Her nursing training helped her focus on practical matters rather than panic. She checked the medical supplies available in the secure area and mentally prepared herself to treat wounded personnel if necessary. The battle raged for hours, with the sound of gunfire ebbing and flowing as different sectors of the base came under pressure. Sarah could hear helicopters overhead, but whether they were friendly aircraft bringing reinforcements or enemy forces, she couldn't determine from her position underground. Around dawn, the nature of the radio communications began to change. Reports indicated that the base's defenders had successfully repelled the main assault, but enemy sniper teams had established positions in the surrounding hills and were engaging anyone who moved in the open. Several soldiers had been wounded, and normal base operations were impossible while the sniper threat remained. All personnel remain in covered positions, Colonel Harrison announced over the base's public address system. We have confirmed sniper activity from multiple locations. Do not expose yourself unnecessarily. Sarah understood the implications immediately. While the direct assault had failed, the enemy had achieved a different kind of victory by effectively shutting down the base's operations. Medical evacuation of wounded personnel would be extremely dangerous, resupply operations were impossible, and the psychological pressure on the defenders would continue to mount as long as the snipers remained active. Miguel's voice appeared on the radio net, reporting from his position near the northern perimeter. Command, this is Romeo 6. We have visual on at least 3 sniper positions in the hills to the northeast. Range approximately 800 to 1,000 meters. We need counter-sniper support to neutralize these threats. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the significance of the ranges Miguel was reporting. During her shooting competition, she had demonstrated exceptional accuracy at 500 yards, but the enemy snipers were positioned at nearly twice that distance. Military sniper rifles and trained personnel would normally handle such threats, but the base's designated marksmen were either wounded or pinned down in positions where they couldn't effectively engage the distant targets. The radio crackled with a conversation between Colonel Harrison and his operations officer. Sir, our sniper team is combat ineffective. Rodriguez took shrapnel in his shoulder, and Sergeant Williams is pinned down in Sector 4. We need alternatives. Sarah listened to the discussion with growing understanding of the tactical problem facing the base. The enemy snipers were positioned at extreme range in elevated positions that provided excellent fields of fire over the entire base. Without effective counter-sniper capability, the base would remain essentially under siege, unable to conduct normal operations or evacuate wounded personnel. Captain Wang's voice cut through the radio traffic with new intelligence. Command, be advised that enemy reinforcements may be moving toward our position. If we can't restore normal operations soon, this situation could deteriorate rapidly. Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible to her just weeks earlier. She approached the radio operator in the command center and asked to speak with Colonel Harrison. When the colonel approached, she made an offer that surprised everyone in the bunker. Sir, I might be able to help with the sniper problem. Harrison looked at her with confusion and concern. Mrs. Martinez, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this is a combat situation requiring trained personnel. Colonel, I demonstrated last week that I can shoot accurately at long range. If your designated marksmen are unavailable, and if you have appropriate equipment, I might be able to engage those sniper positions. The suggestion created an immediate debate among the command staff. The idea of using a civilian, particularly a woman visiting her husband, in a combat role was unprecedented and raised numerous legal and ethical concerns. However, the tactical reality was that the base needed counter-sniper capability, and traditional resources were not available. Miguel's voice came over the radio with increasing urgency. "Command, we're taking accurate fire from multiple positions. 2 more casualties in Sector 2. We need those snipers neutralized immediately." Colonel Harrison faced an impossible decision. Military regulations and common sense argued against involving a civilian in combat operations. However, his primary responsibility was the safety of over 200 soldiers under his command, and Sarah represented the only available resource with the demonstrated capability to address an immediate tactical problem. "Mrs. Martinez, if I were to consider this, it would be entirely voluntary. You would be under no obligation, and no one would question your decision if you preferred to remain in the secure area." "I understand, sir. But those soldiers out there are pinned down, and some of them are wounded. If I have skills that can help, I need to try." The base's armory contained a specialized sniper rifle system, but the weapon required specific training and familiarity to use effectively. Staff Sergeant Santos, the base medic, had cross-trained on the system and volunteered to provide Sarah with a rapid orientation on its operation and capabilities. The weapon was significantly different from anything Sarah had used before, heavier, more complex, and equipped with advanced optical systems designed for extreme long-range shooting. However, the fundamental principles of marksmanship remained the same, and her competitive experience had taught her how to adapt quickly to new equipment. The greatest challenge would be the combat environment itself. Shooting at paper targets under controlled conditions bore little resemblance to engaging enemy personnel who were actively trying to kill her and the soldiers around her. Sarah would need to overcome not just the technical challenges of extreme long-range shooting, but the psychological pressure of taking human life in defense of others. Colonel Harrison made his decision based purely on tactical necessity. "Mrs. Martinez, if you're willing to attempt this, we'll provide you with the best possible support. However, I want you to understand that this will be extremely dangerous, and there's no guarantee of success." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of what she was agreeing to do. Her nursing background had taught her to make quick decisions under pressure when lives were at stake. Her competitive shooting experience had given her confidence in her marksmanship abilities. Now she would discover whether those skills could translate to the most serious situation she had ever faced. The plan developed quickly. Sarah would be positioned in an observation tower that provided clear fields of fire toward the enemy sniper positions. Miguel's reconnaissance unit would provide security and target identification support. The base's communications team would coordinate the engagement to ensure maximum effectiveness and safety for friendly forces. As Sarah prepared for what would become the most important shots of her life, she focused on the technical aspects of the challenge ahead. Wind speed and direction, range estimation, weapon characteristics, and environmental factors all required careful consideration. However, she also knew that success would depend as much on mental preparation and emotional control as on technical skill. The enemy snipers had achieved tactical surprise and positional advantage, believing themselves safe from effective counterfire at extreme range. They had no reason to suspect that their greatest threat would come from a civilian nurse from Texas who had simply wanted to visit her deployed husband. The observation tower stood 30 feet above the base compound, providing an elevated position with clear sight lines to the surrounding hills where the enemy snipers had established their positions. Sarah climbed the metal ladder with Staff Sergeant Santos, carrying the specialized sniper rifle that felt impossibly heavy compared to the competition rifles she was accustomed to using. The morning sun was just beginning to illuminate the mountainous terrain surrounding the base, creating a complex pattern of shadows and light that would affect visibility and target identification. Sarah positioned herself behind the reinforced sandbag barrier at the top of the tower, carefully setting up the rifle system with Santos providing guidance on the weapon's specific characteristics. "The scope is zeroed for 800 meters, Santos explained quietly, but you'll need to compensate for the additional distance and elevation. The wind speed indicator shows 8 miles per hour from the northeast, but that could change in these mountains." Sarah nodded, drawing on years of competitive shooting experience to calculate the necessary adjustments. She had never engaged targets at these ranges before, but her training had taught her the principles of long-range ballistics that would apply regardless of the specific distance involved. Miguel's voice crackled through the radio headset she wore. Overwatch, this is Romeo 6. Primary target is located in the rocky outcropping approximately 900 meters northeast of your position. Second target is in the tree line at approximately 1,000 meters due north. Through the powerful scope, Sarah could see the terrain Miguel was describing. The enemy sniper positions were well chosen, providing excellent concealment and fields of fire while offering protection from direct assault. The snipers had positioned themselves to cover the entire base compound, making normal operations impossible and trapping wounded personnel in exposed positions. I can see muzzle flashes from the primary position, Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was preparing to do. The target appears to be engaging friendly forces in Sector 3. Colonel Harrison's voice came through the command frequency. Overwatch, you are authorized to engage. All friendly forces have been notified of your position and mission. Sarah settled into her shooting position, adjusting her body alignment and breathing pattern to achieve the stability necessary for extreme long-range shooting. The competitive shooting techniques she had learned over years of practice became automatic responses, her mind focusing on the technical requirements while blocking out the emotional weight of the situation. The first shot required careful preparation. Sarah studied the wind flags positioned around the base perimeter, observed the movement of dust and debris to gauge wind conditions, and made mental calculations about bullet drop and drift over the extended range. The enemy sniper was actively engaging friendly forces, providing brief opportunities when his position was revealed by muzzle flash and movement. She waited for the optimal moment, a lull in the wind, clear visibility of the target area, and confirmation that no friendly forces were in the potential line of fire. The shot broke cleanly, the rifle recoiling against her shoulder with more force than she had expected. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's impact in the rocky area near the target position. Miss, but close, Miguel reported from his observation position. Adjust left approximately 2 meters, and try again. Sarah made the necessary correction, accounting for wind drift that had pushed her first shot slightly off target. The enemy sniper resumed firing, giving her another opportunity to identify his exact position. This time, she held her breath, controlled her heartbeat, and executed the shot with the precision that had made her a champion competitor. The second shot found its mark. The enemy sniper position went silent immediately, and Miguel confirmed that the threat had been neutralized. However, there were still at least 2 more sniper teams operating from different locations, and they had now been alerted to the presence of effective counter-sniper fire. Outstanding shot. Colonel Harrison's voice came through the radio. Shift to target 2. The second enemy position was more challenging, located in dense tree cover at maximum range for the weapon system. Sarah could barely make out the general area through her scope, and the target was only visible during brief moments when he moved or fired. The increased range meant that bullet drop and wind drift would be more significant factors, requiring precise calculations and perfect execution. Santos provided additional guidance on the ballistic characteristics of the weapon at extreme range. At this distance, you're looking at approximately 60 inches of bullet drop. The wind will push the shot left about 8 inches based on current conditions. Sarah made the necessary adjustments to her aiming point, essentially aiming at empty air above and to the right of where she estimated the target to be located. The technique felt unnatural compared to the direct aiming she was accustomed to, but her understanding of ballistics told her the calculations were correct. The third shot was the most difficult of her life. The target was barely visible, the range was at the extreme limit of her capabilities, and environmental factors made precise shooting nearly impossible. She waited for nearly 10 minutes, watching for any sign of movement or muzzle flash that would reveal the exact target location. When the opportunity came, she had less than 3 seconds to aim and fire before the target disappeared back into concealment. The shot felt perfect as it left the rifle. Her breathing was controlled, her trigger pull was smooth, and her follow-through was consistent with her best competitive performances. Target neutralized, Miguel reported after several seconds of observation. No movement from position 2. The elimination of the second sniper position significantly reduced the threat to base operations, but intelligence reports indicated that at least one more team was operating from the southern hills. This position was even more challenging, located at nearly 1,100 meters range and positioned to engage the base's landing zone, where helicopter operations were critical for medical evacuation. Sarah was beginning to feel the physical and mental strain of the engagement. The heavy rifle was taking a toll on her shooting position, and the stress of combat was unlike anything she had experienced in competitive shooting. However, she knew that wounded soldiers needed medical evacuation, and the remaining sniper was preventing those life-saving flights. Overwatch, we have wounded personnel who need immediate evacuation, Captain Wong reported. That southern position is covering the landing zone. Can you engage? The final target presented the greatest challenge yet. The range was at the absolute limit of the weapon system. The target was partially concealed behind natural cover, and the shooting position required Sarah to adjust her stance to engage a target nearly 90 degrees from her previous engagements. Santos helped her reposition the rifle and calculate the ballistic solution for the extreme range shot. This is beyond the effective range we normally attempt, he admitted. The bullet will drop over 6 feet, and wind drift could be significant. Sarah studied the target area through her scope, trying to identify any reference points that would help her estimate the correct aiming point. The enemy sniper was disciplined, revealing himself only briefly and unpredictably. She would need to be ready to take the shot instantly when the opportunity presented itself. The wait stretched to nearly 15 minutes. Sarah maintained her shooting position despite increasing fatigue, knowing that the wounded soldiers below were depending on her success. Her competitive experience had taught her patience and mental discipline, but this situation tested those abilities beyond anything she had previously experienced. When the enemy sniper finally revealed himself by engaging a patrol near the perimeter, Sarah was ready. She had pre-calculated the aiming point, adjusted for current wind conditions, and prepared herself mentally for the most challenging shot of her life. The target appeared in her scope for perhaps 2 seconds, just long enough for her to confirm her aim and execute the shot. The bullet's flight time at that range was nearly 2 seconds, an eternity in combat conditions. Sarah maintained her sight picture, watching through the scope as the target area erupted in a small cloud of dust and debris. For several seconds, there was no movement or return fire from the position. All sniper positions neutralized, Miguel finally reported. No movement from any of the previously identified locations. The elimination of the enemy snipers immediately transformed the tactical situation at the base. Medical evacuation helicopters could now land safely, wounded personnel could receive proper treatment, and normal defensive operations could resume. Sarah had achieved what trained military snipers would have found challenging, using skills developed in civilian competition to save lives in actual combat. Colonel Harrison personally climbed to the observation tower to congratulate Sarah on her performance. "Mrs. Martinez, what you accomplished today was extraordinary. You saved lives and enabled this base to continue its mission." Sarah was exhausted, emotionally drained, and still processing the reality of what she had done. Taking human life, even in defense of others, was not something her nursing background had prepared her for. However, she felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that her actions had protected the soldiers who had welcomed her to their base. The aftermath of the engagement brought unexpected recognition. Higher military command requested detailed reports on the civilian marksmanship support that had proven so effective. Sarah's shooting performance became a case study in unconventional resource utilization and the importance of recognizing capabilities regardless of their source. Miguel found her in the observation tower as she was cleaning the rifle system with Santos. His relief at her safety was evident, but he also showed immense pride in what she had accomplished. "I always knew you were special," he told her, "but I never imagined you were capable of something like this." The base's medical facility was busy treating wounded personnel, but the casualties were significantly lower than they might have been if the sniper threat had continued. Sarah volunteered her nursing skills to help care for the wounded, finding familiar comfort in medical work after the intense stress of combat shooting. Colonel Harrison arranged for Sarah's departure from the base as soon as helicopter operations could safely resume. While her visit had originally been planned to last another week, the combat engagement had changed the dynamics of her presence. She had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances, but continued exposure to combat operations was not appropriate for a civilian visitor. During her final evening at the base, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her understanding of military life had changed. She had come to provide emotional support to her husband and gained insight into his daily challenges. Instead, she found herself actively participating in combat operations and using skills she had never expected to employ in such circumstances. The soldiers at the base treated her with a level of respect and admiration typically reserved for combat veterans. She had proven herself under fire, demonstrated courage under pressure, and contributed directly to their collective survival. The shooting competition that had begun as casual entertainment had revealed capabilities that proved crucial when lives were on the line. Sarah's departure from the base was markedly different from her arrival. She was no longer simply a visiting spouse, but a proven member of the team who had contributed to mission success under the most challenging circumstances. The helicopter that carried her away from the base also transported wounded soldiers to higher-level medical care, flights that had been made possible by her marksmanship. Miguel accompanied her to the landing zone for final goodbyes, knowing that their relationship had been fundamentally changed by shared experience in combat. Sarah had not only gained understanding of his military world, but had proven herself capable of operating effectively within it when circumstances demanded. "I'll finish this deployment knowing that you understand what we face out here," Miguel told her as the helicopter prepared for departure. "You didn't just visit, you served alongside us." The flight back to the main airbase gave Sarah time to process the events of recent days. She had traveled to Afghanistan as a civilian nurse seeking to support her deployed husband. She was returning home as someone who had participated directly in combat operations and whose actions had saved lives. The recognition she received from military leadership was gratifying, but Sarah understood that her most important achievement was the contribution she had made to the safety and success of the soldiers at the base. Her competitive shooting skills, developed as a recreational hobby, had proven their value in the most serious circumstances imaginable. Sarah's story became a testament to the importance of recognizing and utilizing capabilities regardless of their source, the value of civilian skills in military contexts, and the extraordinary things ordinary people can accomplish when circumstances demand courage and action. Her visit to see her husband had become an example of how unexpected resources can emerge in times of crisis, and how individual actions can have profound effects on collective outcomes.